Welcome to the latest edition of our Defense Developer webinar series. Today we are focusing on military symbology. I'm Gary Schofield out of Esri's DC office, and at Esri I'm the account manager for Defense C4ISR programs and the program manager for Commercial Joint Mapping Toolkit, or CJMTK. So as I said, today's webinar will be focusing on military symbology. Most military organizations use standard map symbols to visualize the battlefield in support of military operations and planning. These symbols represent military units, equipment, and installations, along with tactical graphics to show military operations, boundaries, or other special designations. ArcGIS provides support for the United States Military Standard 2525 for joint military symbology. We also support the Allied Procedural Publication 6 from NATO. This session will provide an overview of how these standards and military symbology works across the ArcGIS platform. For this webinar, we do expect attendees to already have a basic understanding of the ArcGIS platform. If you are new to ArcGIS, we recommend you watch the recording of our first webinar, Developing Apps for Any Mission. The link is provided at the end of this presentation. However, I do want to talk about why you should integrate military features and tactical graphics into a GIS and the modern architecture of a WebGIS. Traditionally, these symbols were drawn on a map using grease pencil or acetate layers in a planning cell and operations center, as shown in the picture on the left. While this method is still used and valid today, we have transitioned to displaying and transmitting this information on various command, control, and intelligence systems. However, in many cases, these digital implementations still maintain workflows and approaches from that analog approach. They are often implemented as simple graphics drawn on a background map for visualization purposes only. In many cases, these symbols might just be drawn on PowerPoint slides where you draw on top of a map that's been captured from some mapping application. And so there's really no information behind those symbols or ability to track history or other ways to interact with it. By using a GIS, we not only draw the symbols on the map, but also maintain that important feature data represented by those symbols in a geographic database. These are now geospatial features on which you can use the GIS to perform spatial analysis between your military units and plans and other entities and phenomena. So you can better understand how your operations will be affected by things such as weather, terrain, or enemy units and their actions or plans. In addition, when you embrace the WebGIS architecture, you now have a shared understanding of the battle space plans and operations, consumed through a variety of focused applications to support the information needs and functions across intelligence, planning, command, and even into the field. Today, we will focus more on the technical aspects of how military symbology is supported in ArcGIS and our future plans. During the desktop section, we will show how a planner or intelligence analyst can use an application to input the operational environment as shown in the bottom left of the diagram on this slide. Later, we will show how this information is served to web applications for use across the operations center, possibly in dashboards and live briefings via story maps. Finally, we will show how a developer can build embedded native client applications using this geospatial approach to military symbols, perhaps for tactical situational awareness in a vehicle or on foot. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers and agenda for today's presentation. Joe Bales is an innovation engineer on our defense services team, and he'll start off by giving some background on military symbology standards and Esri's involvement in the standards committees. Next, Lyle Wright, a product engineer on our defense service solutions team, will discuss and demonstrate how military symbology is supported in ArcGIS Desktop. And finally, Carrie Robinson, product owner for defense on our software development team, will talk about how military symbology is supported in ArcGIS Runtime. Carrie will also give you a sneak peek into the work we are doing to enhance our support for military symbology in the ArcGIS platform. So let's get started.
Thanks, Gary, and hello, everyone. As an innovation engineer, I work on site with customers to broaden their use of GIS technology and evolve the platform in support of their missions. In my previous role as a product engineer on the defense solutions team, I worked on some of our military symbology implementations. A few years ago, I started supporting the Department of Defense Symbology Standards Management Committee, or SSMC, and their NATO counterpart, the Joint Symbology Panel, or JSP, with technical advice from an implementation perspective. They maintain these two publications, the DoD's Military Standard 2525 and NATO's Allied Procedural Publication, or APP6, both titled Joint Military Symbology. Many organizations around NATO use one of these two publications as their standard, but some keep their own, usually based on the DoD or the NATO standard in some way. For instance, the US Army maintains Army Doctrine Reference Publication 1-02, developed from and in accordance with the military standard. Other countries may use hybrid versions, and so implementers sometimes face the challenge of trying to support several different standards. The Standards Committee understood the difficulty and have tried over the years with varying degrees of success to harmonize the standards. This chart shows some of the major or breaking changes by version. As you can see, they've evolved quite a bit over the last over 20 years. The first date on each version is the release date for the DoD standard, and the second date for the NATO standard. They're currently developing version D, change 1, which will have some interesting changes, including improved cyber symbology, mandate for the last 10 of the 30-digit SIDC, and a great many symbol changes. For those of you that don't know, when I say SIDC, we mean the symbol identification code. And this is the code that machines transmit to each other, usually inside of a larger message, to let the computer know which symbol to render. Some of the information in that message can be used to further develop the entity in the database. For example, the geospatial location for points, or the individual coordinates for each part on the line, or labels, or any number of attributes. For instance, if I send you the following 15-character alpha code, it's just a random set of letters, but if it's in reference to a specific set of schema or set of values, then we both know that I mean a friendly airborne infantry unit, and the computer knows to render the proper symbol. We can change individual attributes by simply manipulating the code to adjust our message. And as you can see, the schema is somewhat hierarchical. However, the committee was having trouble creating new symbols constantly and keeping up as technology and doctrine evolved, and they decided to redesign the entire topology. So at the D version of both standards, they decided to break the symbols into components and allow users to create their own kind of a la carte symbols. So here's the complete symbol from 2525C for a friendly airborne infantry unit. But when we break it into its components, we have a friendly frame, an infantry main entity, and an airborne modifier. To support this and several other things that users wanted, the committee needed a new SIDC that was more robust. And they decided to go with a 20 to 30-digit numeric code. This makes the SIDC much more extensible while still maintaining a relatively small size for ease of transmission. Going back to the friendly airborne infantry unit, we can still represent them, but we can further extend the SIDC to cover some other attributes that we would not have gotten in the code itself. For instance, now they're a company-sized headquarters unit at full strength. Here are some examples of how control measures are presented as points, lines, and polygons, or areas. These are transmitted the same way, using the SIDC code. For example, here are a couple examples from the C and D codes for link-up point, assembly area, and phase lines. It's a lot to get started, and so in 2014 we created the JMSML, or the Joint Military Symbology Markup Language, in GitHub. It's an XML schema and associated instance data designed to document the contents of both standards, both MIL Standard 2525 and APP. In effect, it's a digital representation of the standard. We've stopped actively developing it, but we keep it open, and I personally use it in my dealings with the Symbology Committee to capture issues and track work that needs to be done. The intent was for the DoD and or NATO to do something similar, or to even, take that repository over. And both DISA, the Defense Information Systems Agency, the proponent for 2525, and NATO have plans to develop some sort of open source symbology repository, similar to JMSML. That's it for me. So now I think Lyle is going to tell you about how we implemented military symbology in ArcGIS. Lyle?
Joe, thanks for the brief update on how we draw military symbology. So what I want to do is take that same content that Joe just presented to us and show how that is working inside of our desktop applications, which would be ArcGIS Pro and ArcMap. Today we'll primarily focus on ArcGIS Pro, but just kind of want to start out by giving a brief history on how Esri has supported the military symbology. We've done this for quite some time. And kind of going back to one of the points where we had a product called Mole, and Mole allowed us to support military symbology from ArcMap 8.0 to 9.3.1. And when we created this application, or this product for this application, it was used heavily throughout the entire defense industry and some intelligence, some other places. But what we realized is that moving these components of how we draw military symbology to core was evident, and it needed to happen, and it did happen at ArcMap 10.0. And when that happened, it allowed you to draw all of your military symbols as if you were drawing any other symbol on a map. And with that, we came some other type of solutions that were created by Defense Solutions, and that solution's name was military features. So amongst military features, you had a plethora of layer packages, and those layer packages allowed you to essentially create the operational environment in ArcMap the same way you would have with Mole. And with that, we started to look at a little bit different of how we could start to do that, and how we can not just support ArcMap, but what would we support in Enterprise and with ArcGIS Pro. And that really brings us to our topic now, where we don't just talk about it as military features, we really talk about it as military symbology. And in ArcGIS Pro and Enterprise, we do that through using this new capability called the Dictionary Renderer for ArcGIS Pro. And what it allows us to do is draw this complex symbol in a meaningful way, depending on how you want your data and how you receive your data. So if you receive your data based on just a symbol ID code, we're able to manipulate that into standard military symbology, depending on what type of standard you want, the standards that we support that Joe just went over. It's a rule-based, optimized for fast search and retrieval of a given symbology. What that really means is that we're making information human readable. So if you're not familiar with that symbol ID code, you can still take those meaningful elements to then draw that military symbology. And that might not work for all of us, because we might not understand how to mess with attributes and how to just dig into a database. So what Defense Solutions created, and this is one of the projects that Joe was talking about, this happened a couple of years ago, was the military symbol editor. So the military symbol editor for ArcGIS Pro gives us the ability to walk through a WYSIWYG environment of building an actual military symbol from scratch, to not only populate to the map, but then also save it to favorites, save it for future projects, or even share it with your colleagues. All that's now available through ArcGIS Pro. And it's all made available through this military overlay information model. The military overlay information model allows us to understand exactly how to manipulate these symbols to allow them to render inside of ArcGIS Desktop for ArcGIS Pro, and also how to serve these out via server or in other runtime applications that Carrie will show us. So with that, let's go ahead and just show the concept of this. We have something called the military overlay template that we'll show a little bit of, but ideally, let's go ahead and jump in to this presentation of how do we get military symbology in ArcGIS Desktop. So we're going to start out at that simple point that a lot of us start out with. I have either feature classes or shapefiles, and it's points, lines, and polygons. And they're representing something that is meaningful to me in a way that I need to understand more information about them. So if I just highlight two different features here, I highlighted a point and the polygon. That point is coming from a friendly forces element, and I have this symbol ID code here embedded in the actual database. I also have the same thing for the engagement area, which is here. So that information is then made available to me to where I can now start to populate this information in a meaningful way using military symbology. The way I do that is just by highlighting this this particular layer. So we'll start with friendly forces, and I would go to Symbology, and that would launch the actual window that's over here off to the right. That window then allows me to select that symbology in the same way that we've probably been used to for some time. So we can select a single symbol, we can draw based on colors, we can do a heat map, but what we want to do is select this dictionary renderer. And when we select the dictionary, we have the ability to select different types of fields. So I want to say this is a military standard 2525B change 2, and from here I just take one of the attributes, which is that symbol ID code, and I populate that, and there are my military symbols. So we need to do that with a few of these layers. So we'll do that with this. We'll also do it with our friendly elements, just to give the ability to understand exactly how easy this is. If you have an attribute or a field that's in your database called SIDC, the actual program will pick it up automatically, and you don't have to do this. So then we'll just turn on these other ones and do our last one, which is our areas. And as I do this, I'm starting to get that full picture of what my battlefield environment would look like when drawn with military symbology. From here, I could do things such as just making all the other things that are available through ArcGIS, such as let's go ahead and change our base map and start to understand something. So let's say, for instance, we had one of these features here that we weren't sure exactly what that feature was, and we wanted to maybe change the echelon type, or we just wanted to edit that military symbol. So I can go to that tactical area, and I can do this just the same way I would edit any other data inside ArcGIS. And that's actually this location here, which is this element. And right now I have this as unknown. Let's go ahead and just change that to hostile. Clear that selection. And that element changes. The whole point of that is to allow you to understand that as you receive this information in, it's still something you can edit, you can still share back out with other applications that need to have this information. So the use of the symbol ID is dynamic in the sense that you can take any of these elements and start to just update this information as we go. So this is just a basic example of how we would get basic symbology into the environment, utilizing just points, lines, polygons coming from shapefiles or from a geodatabase. But what if we had to draw something a little bit more challenging, like an entire map of a battlefield? So here I have a few different elements that I've created. So I have a few phase lines, I have a few axis advance avenues of approach, I have an assembly area, and what I need to do is utilize what's called the military symbol editor, which is available through military tools. As just a quick click on the actual ribbon of military tools, it launches this add-in, or it is available by itself as well. So let's say, for instance, I just wanted to find a combat unit. I could search for combat. It's going to go out and look in that entire dictionary to find anything that would be associated with combat. And that would allow me then to select this and start to just explore what's available. We went back to kind of where we started and said, well, I have an infantry unit that I need to add. And I know a little bit about this infantry unit, but I'm not sure how to draw it if I was looking at the symbol ID code. So instead, I want to draw it by giving the elements of the symbol that I understand. So let's say, for instance, it is a hostile, say it's a friendly element. And from that friendly element, I could just say, here we go. So let's say it's this element here, and that's exactly how I wanted it. I could take this element now that I found it, and I could just add it to the map. And now that's made available. But military symbology is more complex than that, in the sense that I need to go in and possibly modify the symbol. So I can come to the symbol, and I can say, you know what? This is actually not a hostile unit. It's a friendly unit. It might have a status. It has an echelon element, so it's a task force, or I'm sorry, it's task force headquarters, and it's possibly a brigade. So now this element starts to draw that entire symbol for us to use. From that point, I can say, you know what, let's go ahead and add that to the map. We know we have one of these sitting out here, and that's now made available. And this can be done with multiple types of any of these graphics that we want. say for instance I wanted a checkpoint, but the challenge that happens is that that's a process that I had to go through to build that symbol. Now what I want to do before I move on is I just want to add this to a favorite list, so if I have to come back and utilize this again, I already have it built. So let's go ahead and start off by looking for some checkpoints. So I search for checkpoint. I know it's a friendly checkpoint, and I have this route along my map that I just want to set some control checkpoints. And as I set those control checkpoints as they're made available, checkpoint something I use constantly, I'll add that to favorites as well. It's going to tell me I already have this added to favorites. So let's stop there and let's go look at the favorites list. And here are all the favorites that I have. As I click through these favorites, I get a better understanding of each of these elements by looking at the tags that are associated in the data model to understand how this is being utilized. So this is a control measure. It gives me the symbol ID code. It gives me it's a control point. So all of these elements have all this information that as you start utilizing this database and this information model, you can start to understand more about military symbology. So you're not just using it blindly, you can use it in the way of actually gaining more information about it. So let's go back to our search. Let's pick this checkpoint here, and we could add that to favorites if we wanted to, but we already have that there. So we'll go ahead and think about another thing. So another thing to understand is how would I update information when I have more information about a particular location, such as my assembly area. If I highlight my assembly area, I come to attributes, I have all this information now that's a little bit different than what we saw before in the points, lines, and polygons that was all driven by a symbol ID code. Instead, I have all of this information here, so I can come in here and say, you know what, this is a certain type of squad, a status, but for this assembly area, it has a name. So I just want to add Bravo to that name, and that information updates as well. So all that information that we have that we're utilizing, we can totally take advantage of inside this data model. Another example is to say I have this phase line and it was not supposed to be Jane, it was supposed to be Jill, or let's actually call it Jose. We can do that, and now that will also update. So we can automatically update this information as we start to build this environment utilizing this information model. So if I was done with this battle plan for what I needed to do, but I needed to send this to somebody else, I don't want to just have them starting from scratch. I could save this information out just utilizing the same sharing mechanisms that we use in ArcGIS Pro, such as I could save this out as a web layer, so stand it up as a feature service and allow people to start manipulating a feature service. I can also create a layer package or a map package out of this, but there's other elements that we do need to utilize that people need to be able to utilize before you create a map package. So one of those would be taking these favorites and creating what we call a feature template from this. So when I have a particular element that I want to have made available, I create a template, and what that template allows me then to do is have these symbols made and available for people who might not be using the military symbol editor. So these are all the templates that I have, and just then I added an infantry unit. So if I search for infantry, there's that infantry unit that I just added that's now a part of my feature templates. So I can take this here and also add that to the map the same way that I did from the military symbol editor. So being able to utilize the ability to create a symbol in military symbol editor and take it to a feature template allows us to share these feature templates or these symbols with everyone that uses ArcGIS Pro. The last thing is that as I have other people that want to utilize military symbol editor, I also want to be able to save my filter, my favorites themselves out for other individuals to use. So I can say, let's just call this Lyle's favorites. I save that JSON file there, and I'm going to just go through and just delete a couple of these. And as I delete these, I'll go ahead and add that same favorite back just to show the capability that I can import that JSON file to then share those back. So I've deleted a few of these. Come here, we'll delete this last one here, and then I'll come into import, show that there. And now all those elements that I had before are now back. So this allows us to not only share the feature template, the data itself, but also the way we create the data by utilizing Military Symbol Editor. Last thing I want to show is just modifying a symbol that we've already created. So for instance, if I was to have this symbol here that I actually did not mean to make a hostile element, I can come out and I can select this element here, and this element will tell me all the information about it. It gives me the symbol ID code. It gives me more information about the actual standard itself and where it sits. But what I want to do is I want to take that symbol and say, you know what, this is actually a friendly unit. It is a task force, and it's a platoon, part of a task force, part of a platoon. So from there, I just save my edits, and then that information makes available. So Military Symbol Editor also helps us manipulate the data that we already have in the information model to allow our users to be able to update content they currently have. So with that, let's go ahead and jump back, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about how we utilize military symbology inside of ArcGIS Desktop. Carrie's going to show us some really exciting stuff of how do you utilize this information model in military symbology for the greater developer community to create those custom applications that all these systems of record or programs of record need.
Thanks, Lyle. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so Joe and Lyle talked about how important it is to be able to configure how you depict your military symbols, whether it's using a symbol ID code, which might be coming from another system, or just describing it using the attributes or the characteristics of the symbol itself. So we try and make it as flexible in the ArcGIS platform as possible so that you can use both ways. And this is the same in ArcGIS Runtime. So in ArcGIS Runtime, we use the same concept of a style file, or specifically a StyleX file, and a dictionary renderer. So exactly like Lyle showed in ArcGIS Pro. This works with either a graphics layer or a feature layer, so you can apply it against a feature layer like a shapefile or another feature class, or just a graphics layer, which might be a temporary overlay or real-time feed that you're working with. The ways that you do this are to first create a dictionary symbol style. So you do that, you point to the StyleX location on disk, and then you can just use that style file if you want. If you want to just search the style, you can do that, and you can get back a symbol. But if you actually want to apply a renderer on a graphics or feature layer, then you can create a dictionary renderer as well. So in this example that we have at the bottom of the slide, we are creating a feature layer, and then we create a dictionary renderer that's based on that symbol dictionary, which is our dictionary symbol style, and then we just apply that renderer to the layer, and it works. And you can configure it to either use a symbol ID code to understand what that symbol is, or to use the fields that are in that data source in order to do that. So it's pretty simple, and it's the same as how we support it in ArcGIS Pro. Now, in ArcGIS Pro, we actually deliver those style files with the product. So that drop-down list that you saw Lyle show for the different styles that you could apply, the different symbology specifications, that comes with Pro. But for Runtime, we actually provide these on a web page. If you just Google for ArcGIS military symbology styles, it takes you straight to this page, and that's where we ask you to go download the style file for the particular version of Runtime that you're using. This is because we have many different SDKs for different languages, and it's best for us to just keep one specific location where you can get that latest version. Okay, so I'll go ahead and show you a few demos just to help you understand how it works in ArcGIS Runtime. Okay, so here we have our military symbology styles page, as I showed earlier on. So this is the page that you go to. You get access to those style files. You see the different versions that we support here. And if you scroll down, you can see the matrix here for whatever version of Runtime you're using. Then you have access to that specific style file. Now, just as an example of how this is working in ArcGIS Runtime, I'll just use the sample viewer that comes with the Qt SDK. So in this example, there's a few different ways that you can work with the military symbols. So one way is to search a dictionary symbol style. This is similar to what Lyle showed in the military symbol editor. So you can just type in some of the keys or the attributes for the symbol that you want. I'll just use the examples that we have here. And then if you list those, you see you get those symbols back. So that's how you would search a dictionary symbol style. But just to show how it would look if you want to display them as part of an overlay, just wait for the network to catch up. Here we go. So this is an example of a military overlay. We can see it has the military symbols applied. If we look at the code, okay, for some reason, I think I just adjust my screen here. Here we go. If we look at the source code, we can see that first we create a dictionary symbol style. We know that it's MIL 2525 Delta, and we point to that StyleX file. And then we apply it to the renderer, the dictionary renderer. And then we use that with our data source. So in this case, it's an XML file. And we know we want to, we don't have symbol ID codes in this file. We actually just have those attribute fields that we want to map to the fields in the dictionary renderer itself. So we can set that mapping here, and then we parse the XML file in order to read the information, and then we apply it to that graphics layer and we render it to the map. So that works in both 2D and in 3D. So it works in 3D as well. Oh, there we go. Should be popping up now. Now, just another example. I'm just running a simulator of some friendly feeds. I just see the windows popping up here. In our dynamic situational awareness example app, which comes with the Qt SDK, we show an example of how you can listen to a live feed of location information messages that have symbol ID codes associated with them. You can use that dictionary renderer applied to a graphics layer, and that allows you to view that information in real time. So that's an example of using this in an app itself in a real-time environment. So that's how you use military symbols in ArcGIS Runtime. Now I'll just go back to the slides. So next I'm just going to give you a quick kind of a sneak peek into what we're working on for the road ahead for military symbology. So really, as I said before, we understand that it's very important to have a number of different ways that you can work with military symbology in all aspects of our platform. And so we're looking at several ways to help improve this. One frequent request that we get is the ability to customize style files. So either take the style files that we provide that match an existing military specification and then modify that slightly, or to be able to create your own. Maybe you have your own symbology standard or set of symbols that you'd like to use. You'd like to be able to create your own. So that's something we want to make sure works. We want to make sure there's more flexibility there so you can configure how the military symbology works in the system that you're building, whether you're using our desktop software, building a web application or building a custom application using our APIs. So we're adding in that flexibility and then just making sure it is fully supported across the ArcGIS platform in all of those environments that I described. So we don't want to change things drastically. We want to use the same workflow that you use now. So the idea of using a dictionary renderer and pointing it to a style file, but just improving on that a little bit. So you would still use ArcGIS Pro to author and configure your data, or to author and configure your style file itself if you want to take one and configure it or create a brand new one. And then if you're building a map with your data, you use ArcGIS Pro to publish that as a map service, but you can also take that style file and publish it as a web style. And this allows that style to be available as a web resource for an application you're building in the web. And if you want to use it in a native application, then you still use that style file with the dictionary renderer and ArcGIS Runtime. as it is today. So I'll give you a little demonstration of what we have working so far. So I'm in ArcGIS Pro. Similar, exactly like what Lyle showed you. I have a military overlay here, and my units are currently just using the default renderer. So in this case, I'm going to say that I want to use a dictionary renderer. So it's exactly the same. I'm going to tell it which style file I want to apply to it. In this case, I want to use 2525 Delta. This is the one that we're working on currently just to test some of these improvements that we're building. And it's a similar kind of experience here. So you can associate the fields within your data set with the fields in that dictionary. If I scroll down a little bit, you can do the same thing for the text fields. If you have a symbol ID code, you can associate that as well. We don't have that in this specific example. But what's new is at the very bottom here, this configuration. So we also give you the ability to configure how you want the symbols to be displayed. So in this case, maybe I want my colors to be dark instead of light for my environment. So I can make that change in the configuration, and then it updates in my map. There we go. And then maybe you don't want the frame, or you don't want the fill, or you don't want the icon. So you can set any of those properties to false, and then that'll update, and that's part of the renderer then that works with your data source. So we'll add in some of these configuration properties that match what the Symbology specification allows, but we'll also allow you to add or customize what exact configuration pieces you want in your style file if you're modifying it yourself. So this is part of that flexibility that I was talking about that we want to give you. So that's one example. Now, if I want to share, this data, then I can share it as a web map, or I can share it as a web layer, which is a map service. And then in that case, that map service would pick up that dictionary renderer as the renderer and apply all of the configuration properties that we set. If I want to use it in runtime, I just do the same thing. I take that style file and I apply that in the application that I'm building. But what's going to be new is the ability to take that style file. So I have the 2525D style file here, and I can share that as a web style. And that's what will publish that web style, make it available as a web resource for your web application development. This is something we're still working on, so I can't exactly show you that, but I can show you a prototype here, a web application. So in this case, I'm showing a military overlay. It's fairly simple. It's still a work in progress, so some of those symbols aren't exactly right yet, so bear with us. But I really wanted to show you the code. So in this case, the JavaScript code that we're using here, very similar to the runtime code that I showed you earlier. So you create your map and your map view, and then you create a new feature layer. You point it to that feature service. So we have a feature service here for that overlay, and then you just specify that the renderer is a dictionary renderer. You point it to that web style, so that web resource that you have, and then you configure it. You configure it for whatever fields you want to use, whatever other configuration properties you want to specify, very similar to what you saw in that ArcGIS Pro interface, and then you can apply that to how you render that data in your web application. So that's just a really quick preview. If you have any suggestions or concerns or comments, please let me know, because we do want to make this work for all of the scenarios that you've kind of expressed frustration with in the past. Okay, so with that, I'll hand it back to Gary.
All right, well, I want to thank Joe, Lyle, and Carrie for their presentations. Today we discussed and demonstrated how we've integrated military standard symbology into ArcGIS, thus enabling military intelligence, planning, and operations to take advantage of a WebGIS architecture to enable better sharing, collaboration, and data-driven decision-making. So now we'll take your questions and try to answer them. So we have a question from Troy Foster. Can the symbols be resized in the runtime side? Carrie, do you have some answers on that?
Yeah, that is something we're looking at. We know this is a common request. So the idea of resizing the symbols themselves and then giving the ability to set scale factors as well is something that we're looking at. So we'll hopefully be able to address that at one of the next few versions of Runtime.
Okay, and then we've had another question from Sam about can we export out, quote, official Esri military symbology to something usable by third parties? Does anybody be able to, Carrie, do you have any thoughts on that? Or
I'm not entirely sure. We don't currently, the way we have the style file in the dictionary renderer, which is usable within ArcGIS. I don't know how. I think I don't understand the question entirely. Maybe Sam, you can clarify a little bit.
I don't think they can. Well, yeah. Sam, why don't we reach out to you and we'll try and talk a little bit more about what you're trying to do and kind of go from there, because I mean, I don't know how it's how it'd be really usable by another app. I don't know that there's any, do we have any support for something where it actually turns it into a picture or something like that, Carrie?
Yeah, there are ways that you can do that. You can export it out as a bitmap and use it in other places. So that is something that would work.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I don't know if that's exactly what you're looking for, Sam, but we'll reach out and kind of follow up and see if that does. All right. I think that's it for questions. Anybody else? Okay, well, I want to thank you for attending today's session and spending time with us here. Please, again, let us know if there's any way we can support you further. So please reach out to us. Again, this has been our second in our series, so I hope that you'll come back and tell your friends about our next webinar on September 19th about building analysis into your applications. And then we'll have another one in October of focused on working with offline data. So it's important to understand while we do a lot of stuff with web and server backends, we do have a lot of capabilities, especially in the runtime world that Carrie showed, for taking that data offline, actually from your enterprise and then integrating back in. So we hope we'll see you again for those and tell your friends and family. Otherwise, I want to thank you for your time and hope to talk to you again or see you again in the future. Thank you.